Report and regulation, Commissioner McNinch for possible action. Commissioner McNinch will report on the substance of the committee meeting held February 21st, 2012 in Reno. And I guess we should add to that. No, never mind. The commission will consider and may take action to amend and or approve draft amendments to the trapping regulations as recommended by the committee for submittal to Legislative Counsel Bureau to begin the adoption process pursuant to NRS Chapter 233B, I believe it should say. I think that's a typo. Anyway, the commission may also provide direction to the committee. Commissioner McNinch.
Wow, okay. Let's see. I'll do the best I can to frame this up. It's been a little bit of, there's been a few days since we had our last meeting. I believe we had our, it's hard to know where to start exactly trying to explain how we got to where we're at, because we have had a handful of meetings. We did meet, I believe, on February 21st, so it's been a month since we met with the trapping stuff. And as you know, we've had an interesting pathway to determine to interpret what we were intended to do, what we were supposed to do pursuant to the mandate of SB 226, which is what prompted this, our pursuit, and trying to blend in the things that pursuant to guidance from our DAG, from Cassie, that would pertinent to some of the issues that have been brought to the table on what we can address under 226 and what we can't. Bottom line is that we've had a basic trapping regulation draft out there that hasn't changed significantly, recognizing that there are a number of other issues on the table that still need to be vetted, at least at the commission level, to determine where we're going to go with those things and how we're going to handle them, if we're going to handle them, that type of stuff. So from our last meeting, we did meet, it was in, God, you guys have to, excuse me, did we meet up here after Vegas? No, it was just down in Vegas. God, isn't that sad? I can't keep track. I've had a lot going on since then.
Yeah, look at you.
I know. It's hard to keep things in perspective. So, all right. Anyway, from the time that we met down in Vegas, we have Rob helped put together a final draft, a draft that we are now presenting to the you guys sure we didn't meet up here?
We did.
Yes.
Yes. It was down there, and then you had a meeting here subsequently.
You had the meeting first in Vegas after the commission meeting.
Yes. And then we met up here on the 21st. That's what I thought. Right. God.
Biking.
I got some extra.
There's no, I'm not on pain pills or anything. I swear to God I'm not. I'm really not. I don't. Okay. There have been some minor changes to the draft that was presented down in Vegas. And there has been additional activity pertinent to some of the areas down south that are not included as part of this trapping regulation. And we do need to discuss that a little bit today to find out where we're going to go with it. And it has to do with the Mount Charleston area and Spring Mountain area. Gina, I'm not sure, you've asked in the past about Red Rock Conservation Area. I'm not sure how much more information we have on that yet, but those are things that are still in the parking lot that we have not forgotten about. There's still issues, there's still items that we need to tend to there, and I know that there has been some thought and some things put onto paper to get things moving in those areas. There's still work to be done in with respect to those. Having said that, we do have a draft in front of us, and there are a couple of minor changes from the committee meeting down in Vegas, and those include under Section 2, where it says, except as otherwise provided in this section, it is unlawful for a person to set a trap other than a box or cage trap within half mile of a residence within the congested areas of Clark County or Washoe County. Okay? So we are back, so half mile, 880 yards, to put it in perspective. Some of the primary comments, one of the largest issues, you guys have gotten the emails as well as I have tended to be 1,000 feet versus 1,000 yards. That's a big discussion. That's a big issue. And to try to stabilize that a little bit. It's not necessarily a compromise, but there was discussion on making it a half mile. People can relate to a half mile better than they can 1,000 yards, 1,000 feet. So that didn't get changed to 1,000 feet, but it is presented as a half mile in our draft. And it does talk about the congested areas of Clark County or Washoe County. Rob, can you help us with the discussion on why we went back to congested areas?
For the record, Rob Bonamici, Chief Game Warden. We kind of did a full circle on the issue back when the issue initially rose, became to light about, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, about 18 months ago. There was a meeting between Trail Safe and the Trappers Association and some other folks, and it was kind of determined at that time that address the congested areas and allow no trapping within 1,000 yards of a residence within a congested area. Then it went to just county-wide, and I think it kind of went county-wide because of SB 226 said we needed to address the trapping close to residences in Washoe and Clark counties. So that is kind of where the 1,000 feet, 1,000 yard issue came up. And then from there, it went to the half mile issue came into it as an option. Everybody can relate to half mile or mile intervals. It's on speedometers, it's on GPSs, so forth. Everybody's got more of a mental picture of what half a mile is, as opposed to 1,000 yards or 1,000 feet. So that's how the half mile came into it. And then congested area re-entered into it because of the location of some of the ranches in North Washoe and so forth. That half a mile would shut down pretty good swaths of area to trapping. So that's how we came back to the congested area issue. And then with regards to the congested area issue, might be jumping the gun here just a little, but in section 2, where we say within a half mile of a residence within the congested areas of Clark County or Washoe County, I think it would behoove us to consider within the congested areas designated by Clark County and Washoe counties. And the reason for that is it makes it real clear. It's not subject to somebody's interpretation, well, there's a bunch of houses there, so I think it's congested area. So it just clarifies that a little more.
Okay. And I'll, is Paul still in here? Where are you, Paul? All right. Please.
Rob, just before you leave and while we're talking on the issue of congested areas, do we need to define in there the firearm congested area as well? I know when we looked at Clark, it was the, no firearm discharge map that we were looking at, and in Washoe County, apparently there's like an animal congested area and a firearm congested area. Do we need to further define that as well?
We could look at that. The issue there is both Washoe and Clark counties have a, quote, congested area. And then the shooting area, Washoe County came up with a map that they have a requirement, an ordinance, no discharge of rifles within 5,000 feet
The unadopted map.
of an occupied dwelling or within, no discharge of a shotgun within 1,000. Clark County has no such ordinance. So Clark County, you can't shoot in the congested area. Washoe County, I don't believe their map is an official congested area map. It's something they tried to put together to help the public with, here are areas you can't be shooting in. So that, to my knowledge, has not been officially adopted by the Washoe County Commission.
So by adopting the language, areas designated by Clark or Washoe County, it would be those actual mapped areas that we've looked at in our committee meeting.
Right.
And in reference to the residential areas, and I wish Paul's back now. Paul, at the February meeting down in Vegas, made the comment during public comment at the end of our meeting on Saturday. And help me out here, Paul, because I don't want to misrepresent Assemblywoman Carlton's comments, because we're getting it 2 or 3 generations down the line here. But apparently, that she specifically told the CAB to focus on residents and to make a rule not too expansive or narrow for the definition around residents and standoff residences, and the regulation appears balanced and holds true to the legislation from the Natural Resources Committee. And I think that that's a good gauge of maybe where we're at, okay? And I as I was reading the minutes, I noted that in there. I remember you making the comment during the meeting, but it didn't ring home to me like it did this time. So for purposes of moving forward with SB 226 and trying to address our legislative mandate, Ms. Carlton was part of that process, and it sounds like, based on her thought process, that we might be heading in the right direction, that we're probably getting fairly close. Now, having said that, I think that we have to be careful that there might still be, that there are probably things that need to be cleared up. We still do need to address Spring Mountain and Mount Charleston areas and a couple of other areas. So I just wanted to note that because I hadn't really I didn't catch that before, I guess. Under Section 2, 1A, provisions of this section do not apply to, so here are some of the exemptions continue to be presented. An employee of the department, federal, state, or local government acting in an official capacity for the purpose of depredation or wildlife control. Okay? And basically that's a recognition that there are folks that have official jobs that are doing the work for other public safety and public health reasons. That there's a balance that needs to be struck here. There's a time to be doing those things in the name of public health and public safety. A person trapping under the written authority issued by a government agency that specifically authorizes the take of wildlife for depredation or control purposes. C, a person trapping on private property, and D, a person trapping in a waterway outside city limits. We continue to get a handful of comments, people concerned about the private property issue and persons trapping in a waterway outside city limits. So we continue to get a handful. You guys are seeing those comments and those letters and those emails. So you should be fairly well up to speed. But as those are presented in here, I don't think that they've changed. They haven't changed significantly from when you saw them last, I think is fair enough. Is that, Rob, fair enough? Nothing in this section is intended to prevent a person from controlling unprotected mice using a mouse trap in or about their residence. Okay, Section 2, subsection 2, as used in this section, and our definitions, box or cage trap means any device designed to contain or confine an animal within a box or cage. Any device designed, built, or made to close upon any portion of an animal should not be considered a box or cage trap. That did not change. Residence means any house, room, apartment, tenement, or other building designed and intended for occupancy as a residence. That hasn't changed. We did include the definition of mousetrap that was reinserted. Means a device whose structure and function indicates a device specifically designed for catching mice. That was largely in response to Assemblyman coming up with a very large rat trap, asking if that was legal or not. So we threw the definition of mousetrap back in to make sure that we had it covered. We're going to play that game too far down the road. County with a population of 100,000 or more means Washoe County and Clark County. There continue to be a handful of concerns with that. Why not just make it population of 100,000, period? The legislation was specific to Washoe and Clark County, so we're going to remain specific to those. And if in the future population something comes over 100,000, then it can be based on some proper census that's recognized. It's not just an arbitrary number. I think we're at 100,001 now, whereas somebody says, no, we're still at 99,999. So it would be recognized through some formal process that a particular place has over 100,000, and then we'd have to take a look at this regulation. And then the definition of waterway means any river, stream, canal, or channel that contains water. That I do not believe changed at all. So I don't know if there's any questions. Just kind of going back to where we originally started with congested area, as opposed to just within the counties themselves, and half a mile versus 1,000 feet versus 1,000 yards.
Thank you.
I'm ready.
Thank you. Why, just, on 2D, the 100,000 population, to make it so you never have to look at it again, why doesn't it say county with a population of 100,000 or more means all counties determined by the official United States Census to have a population of 100,000 or more? And that's done forever, and that's the only thing you could really base it on anyway, is the official United States Census. That's the only official we got. If that's stated in there, law is covered. You never have to look at it again.
You mentioned this to me at the Vegas meeting, and Rob, did we talk about that briefly? I think you and I did.
Yes, again,
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time remembering exactly what happened.
That's why I'm bringing it
We've
up.
had a couple of big meetings since this one, so I got to get my rhythm back here.
Again, for the record, Rob Bonamici, Chief Game Warden. The reason is basically a due notice issue. We're not required. We can do as you suggest, but I believe it is cleaner and better for all parties involved on whatever side of the trapping issue they're on to have this go through this process where it is publicly noticed and everybody is aware that, for example, Elko County is now officially over 100,000, and the commission has recognized that. And so this applies to Elko County, because not everybody routinely goes and checks the United States Census of each county. Mm-hmm. So it's to level the playing ground, make sure everybody's aware of the rules. We don't want to be citing people that aren't aware of what the rules are, and that's the primary reason. Do we have to do it that way? No.
All right, that throws down, and half mile, quarter mile, 2 feet. That argument is, near and dear. One thing is, when this goes out, when it comes back, I just like to make, that's going to probably be a point I would think that maybe some members of the commission might differ on. So I just want to make sure that anything that goes before them on that particular issue, that it doesn't have to go back to LCB if, say it goes out with a half mile and it's determined to be 1 mile or a quarter mile. It doesn't have to go back to LCB. That's for probably Rob or somebody that knows more about that process. If that's the only change we would make at the commission level, that wouldn't have to go back to them, would it? In your experience?
Yes, it would.
It would.
Yeah, any changes to any of our regulations have to go through this process.
So we need to have this officially vote on it before we can send it.
Send it to LCB, right?
So, and that's our intention to do that today.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not quite in favor of, half mile. Pick something a little shorter. I'm thinking, quarter mile is more than 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet's reasonable, quarter mile. But, I'm into those categories, but let me know what you guys went over.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman Macbeth, a couple things to keep in mind here. SB 226 doesn't give us a lot of flexibility on time. I think to get this done in the timelines that were allotted, it needs to be moved out of this commission today. And so a couple of the things the committee recommended at our last meeting. One, we want to get this addressed today. And we realize that there's some things within this. We think this meets what 226 requires. At the same time, we realize there's some other issues, the first of which would be the Mount Charleston Lee Canyon issue. And so the other motion that our committee made was to keep the committee intact and address those issues immediately after we get this done. But the bottom line on this is we need to have this done today or we don't meet our legislative mandate because of timeframes.
Let me address that. It's my intent on our agenda item that deals with committees at the very end of the meeting, that I'm going to go ahead and give the committee an additional charge to go ahead and move forward on some other items.
Great. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
the folks in the audience we've been working with understand that and that the commission
Right.
understands our timeframes today. So.
Yeah. No, that's definitely the case, but we need to stay on this timeline for this regulation. But I tell you, I agree with Commissioner Rain that I do want to talk about the half mile, the distance portion of this. I think that's really the key. So, once we get okay with the rest of the language, I think I'd like to zero in on that piece. Commissioner Shrum?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm still holding that letter from this morning that was sent to me by this attorney, Peter J. Smith. He's an attorney from Carson City, and he had some questions and brought up some questions about the trapping regulations. And if we have a couple minutes.
Yeah,
we
this
just-
is the point, and I guess I had a general question about that. Rob, did you take a look at that letter, and what did you what did you think of his comments?
I haven't had a chance to look at that letter yet.
I assume all the commissioners received it. But anyway, he said, I had seen the proposed language for your new trapping regulation. I spent more than 30 years both writing and enforcing state regulations and trying to defend clients from badly written statutes and agency regulations. At first read of your proposed language, I see a few problems which I think need to be brought to the attention of the commission before this language is adopted. First, the congested area. That needs to be defined somehow. What the commission might think is common sense is not going to be enforceable except in densely populated areas. There's a wide range of more or less congested areas where trappers will claim the right to place traps and where homeowners with pets or children in their traps or finding live wild animals in the traps will think this regulation should apply. I know that the discharge of firearms is not allowed in congested areas, but I have no idea exactly what that means or what some judge is supposed to think it means. 1 acre zoning, 5 acre zoning, 10 or 40 acre zoning, what is a congested area? If the regulation is vague, it cannot be enforced. Second, the written authority exemption. Shouldn't that authority specify the location of the trap in a congested area in order to qualify for the exemption? Almost any trapper can get an authorization from some agency to trap something. That alone should not be exempt trapping in congested area unless the authority specifies a location and states it intended to exempt the trapper from this regulation. The same argument applies to the agency employee exemption. Third, the private property exemption. Do you mean on their own private property or just any private property? The way you have this written, it exempts trappers on any private property. I doubt this is the commission's intent. Fourth, the waterway exemption. Do you mean just in the water, or do you mean along the banks of the waterway? If so, how far from the waterway is there going to be an exemption? Steamboat ditch, for instance, that is a waterway. It flows through congested areas. Is a trap only exempt when it's placed in the actual water? How about when a ditch goes dry? Is it still a waterway? This particular ditch runs through the backyards of 1,000 homes in congested areas. Is a commission exempting all the traps that are laid in that waterway and in the bushes along the high or low water line? You're talking about people's backyards here. Be very careful. Fifth, the 1,000 population definition is misplaced. I think there's a drafting rule that agencies are not allowed to make regulations for named counties. That is why you see statutes and regulations where it is applying to counties with populations in excess of XXX. That is a little game that drafters play with the rule because everyone knows which counties have more than 100,000 populations. Six, this brings an obvious question. What makes this regulation only for 2 counties? Why shouldn't this regulation apply around Carson City, Minden, Gardnerville, Yerington, Elko, and Tonopah? Are not all the public concerns about trappers in congested areas the same in those towns? What difference does it make what the local population of the county might be? Is this proposed language just a gimmick to placate animal lovers in the big cities, or is the commission really trying to help resolve a serious problem? Is the commission telling residents of small counties that they do not care about the threats presented by trappers near their homes? It looks like the commission is making an attempt to adopt some reasonable regulation on the trapping issues. This proposed language may be a good start, but if it's going to be applied to the real-world situations and be more than window dressing, I suggest that the commission needs to be clear about its intentions and make the regulation enforceable. Thank you. Peter J. Smith. So, I'd like to have this entered into the record, please.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and comment on some of them? I think some of them are probably good, but obviously didn't know everything that we were dealing with, so.
Correct. For the record, Rob Bonamici. First, the congested area, we found that one. Kind of tightened that up a little bit.
Can you go over your change on that too? Just one more time?
Okay, on section 2, except as otherwise provided in this section, it is unlawful for a person to set a trap other than a box or cage trap within half mile of a residence within the congested areas designated by Clark County or Washoe County.
And so with regard to his comment on specifically mentioning Clark County and Washoe County, since this legislation's, I think, did the legislation itself, I'm trying to remember, SB 226, did it
I'll
actually
dig it out.
Yeah,
did
it's
it specifically
it says
mention?
Clark.
specific to Washoe and Clark.
Yes.
So I think that if the legislation is written that way, then I think we're probably okay mentioning it in the regulation.
And then with regards to his second issue, the written authority exemption, under 1B, it must specifically authorizes the take of wildlife for depredation or control purposes. It's not just to go, we're giving you authority to trap within this area, just because. So it's specific to that.
And how many agencies do that?
Basically us, as far as the authority to set traps.
Can we just say that?
We could, there are Department of
Department
Ag and
Okay.
Wildlife Services. We have an MOU with Wildlife Services, so we're covered there. I think we have it covered.
Okay.
The private property exemption, it means what it says on private property. So for example, if you have a raccoon problem on your private property,
You could have Joel.
you can take care of it, or you can call Joel up. And so, or your kids, or your cousin, or whoever. Yeah, as long as they are legal about it, not within the 200 feet of a roadway and so forth. And then the waterway exemption, there is some wiggle room there. We couldn't come up with a squeaky clean way of writing that. We tried to keep it in the waterway. It was originally near a waterway, and that was fraught with issues. What's near 5 feet, 50 feet, 500 feet. So we kept it to within the waterway, and then we defined the waterway as river, stream, canal, or channel that contains water. So it's got to contain water at the time. It's not a perennial stream or something like that.
On the waterway thing, before you move on, Rob, this came up, and we've gone back and forth on the waterway issue, and I just wanted to make sure that we didn't end up in a TCID canal break again. You've got the steamboat ditch that runs fairly high through town, and you got multiple ditches on the north and the south of the Truckee River. I contacted 4 of the ditch companies. These ditches are prescriptive easements. and they consider them private property, even though they run past stuff. So the ditch companies monitor who would be trapping, and to the ditch companies, it's private property. So it runs behind people's houses, as he mentions in that, but it is private property.
And then with regards to the 100,000 population definition is misplaced. What LCB does is they look at what we've drafted, provided them, and if they feel it needs to be changed, as long as they capture the intent, they'll take care of that. But I'm not aware of, he may be correct, I just don't know. But I'm not worried about it.
The legislation, and Cass can help me out with this a little bit, the original language referred to Clark and Washoe counties, and then the amendments that ultimately ended up in place referenced counties of population at 100,000 or more, and then the actual draw-up of that bill said counties of 100,000 or more, and then in parentheses it says currently Clark or Washoe County. So it's kind of going back and forth between the two. Doesn't necessarily answer your question, but that's how it was written. That's how, so it's clarifying that, it's kind of implying 100,000 or more, but then it uses Clark and Washoe County to identify specifically. So I think that it's an LCB issue that they're going to have to address that, and we may very well end up with 100,000 or more. I don't know. Go ahead.
And then,
Or Rob, maybe while we're on the topic of the 100,000 or more, under 2, as used in this section, we have a definition D for a county with a population of 100,000 or more, but we don't actually state that above. And I think that's because it changed out with the congested area. So just thinking, would the wording for the top of section 2 work if we were to say within 1/2 mile of a residence within the congested areas designated by a county with a population of 100,000 or more? And then we'd have Washoe and Clark defined down below, instead of naming them in the top part of section 2.
I agree with that.
Because you're implying that that county with the 100,000 or more would be the one designating the congested area.
okay, I see what you're saying. We could do it that way. We'll just have to play with the definition
I think
under
if we
2D.
I think if we did it that way, at that point, that county with 100,000 or more is already in there, so we'd already have the reference set up. And that's what I was trying to do. So it'd be areas designated by a county with a population of 100,000 or more,
Which is defined.
which is defined under D as Washoe and Clark.
Currently defined, because it was referenced as currently in the bill. So maybe that's an appropriate way of handling it, or presenting it. Be consistent with
That
how
would
they
work.
presented things.
So you're saying currently means?
No, I think, we can play with the verbiage if we want, but I think the way that Commissioner Drew just read Section 2 would be the appropriate way of writing that.
Yeah, I agree that.
And then the definition down below, if we want to make it consistent with what they did in the legislation, in the actual bill draft, we can do that. But I think leaving it the way that it is, I think it's close enough that it's so similar to how they were referencing things that in their own bill, their own workups, that if they have a problem with it, then they probably have a problem with how they did it in the first place, and they can change it accordingly.
Okay. Is there any more?
That's it for that. Just so everybody's on the same page with the thinking how I explained the congested area definition when first asked earlier, and the firearms. If the commission wants to consider expanding from just the congested area designated by the county there could be some wording placed in there, and those areas restricted to the discharge of firearm by county ordinances. So that's just an option for you to consider. I'm not a proponent one way or the other.
Well, I imagine we're going to go out to public comment and see what the trappers think about that. So do you want to just hold off on that piece of it?
Sure.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments? Any other? Go ahead, Commissioner Howell.
I would think we'd want to get to the distance.
Right.
That's going to be very contentious, I believe.
Yeah, I think the commission need to talk about it, and then we'll take it out to the public. Is that, everybody okay with that?
Let them go first?
No, I'm saying let's us talk about it first. Do you agree?
Sure.
Okay. Let's us talk about it first,
If
and
it
then we'll
pleases
take it
the
out.
court, I'd like to start.
Okay, go ahead.
Number one, the way it reads right now is 200 feet, right? That's the original verbiage before we started
I
changing
think
it.
there's some statutes or from a road. That's a Nevada NRS, right? Okay.
It's what?
There's a Nevada statute that says no trapping within 200 feet of a road.
And that's separate from this bill.
Well, it doesn't say anything about a residence.
No.
Yeah. Well, it would seem to me 2.5 times that would be more than sufficient for a residence. You know what a lot of people forget about is they keep talking about dogs getting caught in a trap. Well, that incident is very rare. In Clark County, we get more dogs and cats killed by automobiles every week than get caught in traps in a year or more. And if you start taking the traps away from a lot of areas in Clark County, I'm not familiar with Washoe County, but in Clark County, you're going to have them coyotes and bobcats killing a lot more dogs and cats than they already are. Right now, they're pretty satisfied with killing rabbits and quail and ducks and geese on the golf courses every single night. Every day I play golf, I see kills. Every day. And I play a lot. And there are going to be dogs and cats going if you start taking them trappers away from.
So that's
Put 'em too
500
far.
feet? You're
I'm saying 500 feet. 500 feet that's 2.5 times what it. You know, that's more than enough.
Okay. Got 500 feet, we can write this down, 500 feet on, I'm gonna keep tally. 500 feet, Howell. Okay, who's next? Okay, Jeremy.
Just kind of the genesis of this thing. When we started, it was originally for the whole portion of the county. And at that point, 1,000 feet is where I landed. I don't know that that's as critical within the congested areas. My concern is if we go to 1,000 feet, we have had some issues in and around parks, and I'm not sure that 1,000 feet necessarily would handle that. I can think of a couple in this area that, you know, you might have a municipal or a county park, not necessarily within 1,000 feet of a residence. So we got to be a little bit careful and cognizant of that. It would be a slam dunk for me to say 1,000 feet. If we were looking at the whole county, again, if we stick with the congested areas and we cut it to 1,000 feet, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but let's, you know, maybe we look at adding in municipal park or something like that, just so we're not letting something slip through the cracks that has been a problem.
So what you're saying, in effect, is that we ought to, because I don't want to go into the parks right now, I don't want to go into campgrounds, I don't want to do any of that at this point, but you're saying we ought to be thinking about that in relation to the distance.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you're is 1,000 feet enough if you're dealing with a campground
I think that's something that we can address in the next iteration that I was mentioning that the committee is going to have to tackle. Like I said, within the congested areas, I'm kind of sixes, to be honest with you. If it goes outside of the congested areas, I think 1,000 feet, absolutely. The reason I say 1,000 feet is because we have a model in Washoe County with some of the trails that has seemed to work really well and alleviated some of our concerns up here. So at least we have kind of a precedent and a model that's working for us.
And what's that distance on that regulation?
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet?
Yeah, and then the same consistency, it just seems to make some sense to me.
Okay. Anybody else? Commissioner Rain?
I'm looking at basically four numbers. I'm looking at 500 feet, 1,000 feet, maybe quarter mile, maybe half mile. And then I guess there's always things beyond that. But those would be the options I'm throwing out there. And, half mile to me is a bit extreme looking at the maps. The options below that, I'm somewhat open. Thank you. I'd like to hear what the public has to say about those things.
Anybody else?
Not right now.
Well, this issue to me, I really, when I really get down to it, I ask myself, how are we gonna minimize the conflicts with people that are living in these residences, and what is the separation that we need to minimize that conflict? And maybe, I guess I'm getting I need to understand something. If a house is if a residence is in the congested area, the congested area is already outside the limit for trapping according to this regulation? Or it's still 1,000 feet or a half a mile, whatever distance it is. So the only residences that are within the congested area are the residents we're talking about. And then once we define, once that is a residence we're talking about, then it's 1,000 feet or whatever the distance is. Okay, got it. So really, the distance should be a distance that's going to minimize this conflict, because that's really what we're talking about. And so, we had this interesting discussion in the Clark County Cab that centered on, dogs getting away from their owners and voice control and all that. And I didn't make, I just sat there. I was quiet as a church mouse at this meeting, and I just sat there and listened. And I'll tell you that one, I didn't understand it. I don't think that the issue is, dogs, being a certain distance from their owner and being away, outside of voice control. I think that you have a dog right next to you. That dog could be healing right next to you, be trained, and step in a trap. And so the question in my mind is what kind of a distance do we need to have for both the owner and the dog to be away from their residence? And, and obviously there's going to be certain people that venture miles from their residence. But we shouldn't have a regulation that deals with the exception. We should have a reasonable regulation that deals with, a reasonable distance, that we capture the majority of the problem issue. And so, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know what it is. It seems to me that, it should be at least a minimum of 1,000 feet. That's, we're talking 300 yards. And I'm thinking is that a little too, is that not enough? Are there people that have residences that are going to be, likely to go beyond 300 yards from their house and potentially get in trouble? But then is a half a mile too far? A mile to me seems too far, clearly. And is a half a mile too far? Or is that right? Is that a good distance?
Point of information, Mr. Chairman, you talked about 1,000 feet. That's 72 acres.
Yes.
You drew a circle, 1,000-foot radius.
Did everybody see Paul Dixon's email?
He's not that big.
He made a number of, I've got it here. I can give you an idea of, let me just kind of say them out here. So a half a mile, 880 yards is 502 acres. So that's the buffer zone, 502 acres. 1 mile is 2,010 acres. 1,000 yards is 649 acres. 1,000 feet is 72 acres. 500 feet is 18 acres. And so I guess I'm asking myself, our goal here should be to have regulation that minimizes conflict, and we really need to, it needs to minimize the conflict in the eyes of the legislature. In other words, we don't want to have the legislature coming back to us, telling us what this should be. And so we should be reasonable, and we should come up with a number that everybody can live with. And so I approach this from one side, and that is asking, what is a reasonable distance for homeowners to be away? And then I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to ask Joel or trappers, what is the reasonable distance that trappers trap next to residences? Well, we will. And so that, I'm framing it. So when we get public comment, and ultimately when we come back to vote, that's where I'm at, is what is that distance? And I'm going to be honest with you, when somebody says something that really says, okay, I got it, and that's probably the best distance.
This won't apply to 99% of that property in congested area.
Okay, well, let's get to it. So anyway, that's the way I'm seeing the distance issue, and so, we're gonna take it out to public comment, and so let's do that. Are we all now okay on the distance issue and talked about it? Anybody have any other comments? Okay, I'm gonna open this up to public comment, and
Mark Hutchinson.
For the record, Mark Hutchison, owner of Critter Control here in Reno. I'd like to thank the Trapping Regulation Committee for all their hard work. It's been a long process. All you guys did really great on it all. You listened to industry concerns and took that into consideration. From what we see here today, I don't think we have anything to worry about in industry on our side. It looks like we got the exemptions that we asked for, so we can continue to provide the level of service for public health and safety. The only suggestion I have is this wording here about the mice and the mouse trap. Pull that out, because it's already covered under line number 1, section C, trapping on private property. People can already use mouse traps if they're on private property. There's no reason to list specific traps, because you guys left out rats, gophers, and mole traps, and those are all body gripping traps too. And most homeowners use those when they control those kind of rodents on their property.
okay, thank you, that was a good comment.
Betty Dodson.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Betty Dodson. And I want to mention first and foremost that I do strongly support the draft amendment for a half-mile distance from either a house, a trail, or a public park. I think that really is not that far. I mean, I don't know where most people don't see that as being such a huge distance, particularly when it comes to trapping or even hunting. I do feel, though, that your regulations just really don't go far enough. Upland game hunters have to pay all kinds of fees. They have limits on the number of animals they can take. They must take hunter safety courses, and so on. In addition, as a whole, most hunters do not allow their game to suffer. The trapper, on the other hand, has one $10 license that they pay, and I believe that's for life. And you can't even find that license requirement on the website right now. I couldn't find it. They don't need a hunting license for coyotes, badgers, skunks, raccoons, and weasels, etc., but others do require a hunting license. Coyotes in this state go unprotected, and I'm just wondering if we're going to end up like we did back in the 40s and 50s, where we had jackrabbits and mice all over the place in this state. You folks here may not remember those days, but I do. The trapper is supposed to turn in a questionnaire on their catch, and I'm just wondering who monitors and makes sure this really happens. Does it happen on a regular basis? Does the game warden monitor it? I just don't know. Who determines the accuracy?
Let me, we're trying to consider this regulation. It seems like you're going into an anti-trapping, you're basically don't.
I am not anti-trapping. I am anti-trapping being unregulated. I want trappers regulated as much as upland game hunters and others.
Okay, what we're talking, the scope of this, this agenda item is to deal with the regulation on trapping in Washoe and Clark counties.
And I just really feel that regulation doesn't go far enough. I want that on the record. And I think that the half a mile is certainly realistic and should be considered seriously.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Janay.
Jim Janay, Lion Cab. We discussed this even though it pertains mostly to Clark and Washoe. And the problem we're having is no matter what happens, with Fernley as close to Washoe County as it is, the laws bleed over. And if anything happens out there, we're going to get people that come from here are aware of it and pursue it. The last gentleman, or I think gentleman or two ago, they mentioned the mousetrap bit. If there was moles, there's gophers. You know, I live on 2 acres, and I have trapped 6 skunks here in the last week from under my porch. So these things do apply, and there were numerous of them that, you know, are worried about it, even though things are covered and how they can do it and so on. They definitely wanted to propose 1,000 foot as a maximum, not the half mile. So we do have those things to kind of consider, even though that isn't what's being talked about here. And we just wanted to point it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Caron Taylor.
Hello, excuse me. Hello, for the record, my name is Karen Taylor, Washoe County resident. I'm speaking for myself. I also would like to thank the Trapping Regulation Committee, who has worked so hard on these issues. Commissioner McNinch has definitely been an inspiration for those of us that had anger issues over this issue, and he has really conducted the meetings quite well. If we're going to make changes, I'd like to see it within a mile of a residence. I think a mile is a pretty easy thing. Anybody who's ever done sports, a mile is a pretty easy thing to figure out. Anybody who's ever been a hiker or done anything in the wilderness, a mile is pretty easy to determine. So if we're going to make changes, I'd like to see it extended to a mile. My concern is also the waterways thing. I don't even know why we need to be trapping in waterways. I would like to see that omitted totally. Thank you.
Louise Rogers.
You know what would be helpful for me is that when you guys are testifying, if you're gonna say a distance, it'd be easier for me. It's easier for me to understand in the context of this regulation the distance if it's in relation to avoiding the conflict. In other words, the chance of people, you know, not getting into people that are dogs getting into traps, as opposed to couching in terms of ease of measurement. That doesn't do anything for me. Ease of measurement, we have GPS units, we'll be able to determine what the distances are. I think law enforcement will be able to do that just fine. I don't think we need to be worrying about how to measure it. But really the purpose of this is to try to, you know, minimize the conflicts. That, at least that's what it is in my mind. And so, you know, if you're going to propose a distance, just help me a little bit with that issue, because that's what it's going to do for me. So, go ahead.
Trish Wayne. And Trish, I have a question for you. You have two cards in, one representing Trail Safe and one representing Nevada politics.
That is correct. I checked it out with the legal person here, and I was told that since this is not televised in Las Vegas, and since a colleague of mine in Las Vegas wanted her statement read, that I asked permission, and I was told I could do so.
Okay, I was just, and so on.
You know what, and actually, Cassie asked me about that, and I said,
Okay, because
I think it was just to read the statement, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm Trish Swain. I'm speaking for Trail Safe. I never have enough time to get to all the things I want to say, and then the discussion is taken over by this commission. You all decide among yourselves. What seems to me in a very arbitrary fashion, this whole discussion about distance seems to me totally arbitrary, whereas we have this elaborate science to decide what we're going to do about bears and what we're going to do about deer. There's no logical reason for any of these choices. Naturally, we want the maximum distance we can get. I think a mile sounds good. I think a half mile is a reasonable compromise. Below that is ridiculous. What we're talking about, the intent of 226, is to regulate trapping. That's what I say over and over again. Here are some other things I say over and over again. If coyotes and other predators were not slaughtered in outrageous numbers, there would be natural rodent control, because we hear so much about how people are so besieged with rodents. There are simple, effective, humane, and non-lethal solutions to wild animal encounters. Non-lethal. Why is lethal means the first choice that everybody seems to feel they have to make? It is not. Now, I talked about the state of Washington, and I was told, oh, we don't talk about what they do in other states here in Nevada. Then I hear in other testimony, yeah, we talk about what goes on in other states. What, do we advance with the times, or do we just wall ourselves off and say we're never going to consider doing things differently in a new and better way? I've told you several times that the Fallon Reach levee situation was solved by trapping muskrats in a box style, not a body gripping trap. There again, you don't have to have your body gripping trap to solve a problem. Both Department of Wildlife and Washoe County Animal Services keep no records of coyote attacks upon pets. Therefore, there is no record confirming claims that this is such a serious problem. Yet we hear over and over again, this coyote menace, this coyote menace. We have no proof of it. We have no official records. I'm angry. The TrailSafe website.
Trish,
yeah.
Just a second, hold on. As I did with the other gal that came up, we're dealing here with a specific regulation, and
Absolutely,
and,
these are the things that I think should be considered in the regulation.
But trapping is legal in Nevada, and
I'm not saying to make it illegal.
Okay, but what I'd like for you to do is to address the regulation.
I am.
The distance.
No, there's more to it than the distance.
And any other specific issue that's in the regulation.
Yeah. And the problem with the regulation is what's not in it. It's not regulating trapping. Please let me make my points. That's what happens. I don't get to make my points, and then later on I come in and I hear people asking a question that I've already talked about. So I beg you to let me make my points. The TrailSafe website has an ever-growing, accurate list of pets and other unintended trappings. Nobody else keeps such records. Some names are left off at individuals' requests, but all can be substantiated. Have commissioners looked at these pages? I question whether they have, because I keep hearing, well, there's only one case, there are only two cases. No, there are 12 long website pages of trapped pets and other incidental trappings. We have yet to hear why mandatory trap registration, which I know is statutory, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and public warnings should not be required. We hope you recommend adoption of the draft regulation with the following changes. Minimum of a half mile for the distance. The only exemption that TrailSafe supports is the exemption for private pest control companies because they trap in a responsible manner and they have identification on their traps. They visit their traps frequently and they have liability insurance. TrailSafe emphatically objects to traps in waterways because these are usually the conibear type traps that are impossible to open, cause grievous damage to animals, and we think the introduction of the term city limits, which I'm unsure where we ended up with the city limits thing, serves to confuse rather than to clarify the issue. TrailSafe is much encouraged by hints that the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners might introduce legislation in 2013 that would require identification on traps and that would shorten the visitation time to 24 hours throughout the state. These two reforms are essential. As I've said so many times, how can you say you're regulating trapping? How can you go to the legislature and say you're regulating trapping if you do not have any identification on a trap? My dog gets trapped, who do I go to?
Trish, come on, let's keep these. You can make these comments in the public comment period. I'm not telling you can't make them. I'm just saying let's, look. We've got a lot of cards, and I don't want to be here all night. So if you could,
you're not going to be here all night. This is the longest I've ever had a chance to speak, and I'm almost done. And so, therefore, the other thing I'd like to say is that somebody mentioned a handful of comments from the public. It's the same thing as the bear people were saying. We've had, just in February and March alone, 319 emails. You have those, and I really never hear mention of what the public has to say regarding this issue. And you have 319 emails you can look at right now. I have over 1,000 I'm happy to share with you, and you can see what the public thinks. Because again, the topic of ethics was brought up, and we do not think that animals are treated in an ethical manner by body gripping traps. So that's what I have to say right now.
Okay.
And then if you'd like, I can go ahead with the other one.
Yeah, let's do it. I got your cards together.
Okay, this one is a letter from Stacia Newman, who is the Vice President of Nevada Political Action for Animals. She says, Dear Nevada Department of Wildlife and the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners, I object to the fact that the general public has had very little representation on the trapping issues in the state of Nevada. It appears that the safety of residents and tourists are not being taken into consideration. According to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, 38 million people visit Las Vegas every year. Several weeks ago, Governor Sandoval launched the Discover Your Nevada campaign to encourage residents and tourists to explore, enjoy, and discover Nevada. The literature promotes all outdoor activities, including camping, hiking, sightseeing, and visiting historical attractions throughout the state. We have no control over where the visitors will venture to enjoy all the natural treasures Nevada has to offer. But the state does have control over making their visit as safe as possible. Your first responsibility should be to the public safety of citizens and tourists. Therefore, I urge you to approve the following. A trap boundary of 1 mile from all residential and commercial structures, roadways, paths, waterways, campgrounds, recreation areas, and hiking trails. Mandatory identification tags on all traps, including the name, address, and telephone number. Traps to be inspected by the trapper every 24 hours. Trappers to be responsible for the veterinary care and cost of injured pets as a result of their traps. Trapping signs to be posted in all trapping areas to warn the public they are entering a trapping zone. The cost of the signs to be provided from the collected trapping fees. Thank you for your time and consideration in this manner. And I thank you. I don't mean to, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elaine Carrick. No? Harvey Logan?
Yes.
Graham Stafford?
Hi, my name's Graham Stafford. I'm a Washoe County resident. For the record, everybody else is saying that, so I thought I would too. I'm an avid outdoorsman, a lover of Nevada. I love the backcountry of Nevada. We have a lot of open country here in Nevada. I've heard that 84% of Nevada is public land, state, federal, and county. I would think with that much open land, trappers would, out of respect, say to residents, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, I'll be more than happy not to trap within a half mile or maybe a mile of your residence, just out of respect for other people. I am not, I'm kind of an anti-trapper, but some of the things, that you mentioned John Q. Public. I've just got involved in this issue here recently, but I've been talking to friends and neighbors and stuff, and they're shocked to hear that trappers can trap within 200 feet of their residence. they're shocked. They don't know it. And then I happen to mention to them that, well, they can leave an animal in a trap up to 4 days. And they're shocked to hear that. They're shocked. People, I think the reason trappers can do what they're doing today is because the public doesn't know about it. I think that if the commission doesn't make some sort of listen to people like Trail Safe and make some concessions towards them, and if it gets out to the public what's going on with trapping, which I think it will, there might be a groundswell grassroots thing that happened in 8 other states. It just happened in Colorado in 1995 where trapping was outlawed. I think that could happen here in Nevada once the public heard about it. So I behoove the commission to listen to people like Trail Safe and to take their considerations seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Bruner.
For the record, Bob Bruner speaking for myself. I'd like to thank Dave and the committee, the subcommittee. They heard 5 hours of this on one night and 5 hours of this on. So we've heard all of these issues, and Dave was able to very clearly bring it back to this is a direct response to SB 226. Okay, the 1,000 feet was adopted when they did the last Trail Safe program, and they worked together and got Whites Creek and Thomas Creek. They used 1,000 feet. It's effective. It worked. It's not random. It's not made up. It's worked. Okay? So when you stick to the plan, it's not on the agenda for tomorrow. You need to be able to come to these items right here. The attorney who is looking for a job, that's why we send it to LCBS. I mean, they'll clear that up for you. That's what they do. So you don't need to clear those things up. That's why we go to LCBS and they'll say, oh, that can't be washed, or that has to be 1,000, whatever. They'll fix that. Okay? If you also take a look at what the CAB said, they said adopt this regulation and go to 1,000 feet. So I didn't see the last couple of CABs, but I saw a whole bunch of them, and that's exactly what they said. Please adopt this the way it is so we can address SB 226, we can follow the laws we were instructed to do here, and we can go ahead and address that and move on if we need to. But this is, I mean, after, I don't know how long the meetings were in Vegas, but I mean, they got 8-10 hours down there. They got 8-10 hours up here to hear these kinds of things. They got them down to here. So if we've got, some last things we need to do, let's go ahead and do it and say, let's adopt this and with 1,000 feet. Then we go ahead and send it on to LCBS. We've complied with the law. And then if there's anything else, we can go ahead from there. Thanks.
Lisa Bonta. No. Don Moldy.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Don Moldy, Reno. After attending the Clark County CAB the other night, I thought you were going to, right about now, be saying, let's take this bill back to the legislature and tell them to shove it into the circular file, because I heard all kinds of interesting comments. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If dogs don't get caught in traps, but if they do, it's the owner's fault. We're saving humanity from the plague, rabies, TB, heart disease, blah, blah, blah. Let's not do anything different. And if you have to do something, one guy said, make it 50 feet. And that was basically the gist of it. It was really quite humorous. But unfortunately for me, because I guess you're not going to tell them to shove it, because, I'd love that. I'd love to go to the legislature and argue recalcitrance on the part of this agency for 35 years about doing anything for trapping reform, because that's what it's been. But I guess I won't get that chance. I am in favor of the half mile, because nobody in their right mind needs serious trappers to be trapping within a half a mile of anybody's residence in any urban, suburban area. The only guys that are going to be setting traps there are kids who don't know what they're doing, or guys too lazy to go out of town a little ways and who want to get back and watch the golf match on TV or a ball game. We don't need those kind of guys trapping anywhere around our house. And the idea that they're going to keep coyotes and bobcats away from our pets is silly. There's no data to support that. I have coyotes come through my yard periodically. I've never lost a pet in 35 years. So I think you ought to do what's right. Go for the half mile. And I also share concerns about the waterway exemption. Conibear traps are absolutely awful, and when pets are caught in them, it's something the family remembers for decades. and I don't agree with that exemption. Thank you.
Gerald Lent. John Reed. Rex Flowers.
Rex Flowers speaking for Washoe County. Our vote was unanimous to go to 1,000 feet. We felt all the regulations were good except for that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Joe Blakesley. You're representing Trappers Association?
Yeah.
So you got 6.
Okay. You want me to talk about the distance right now and get it out of the way, and then I'll do the other stuff?
Okay.
It's interesting to me that this has become a competition, and I'll tell you why we came up with 1,000 feet. If you think about it, if we're going to go into the congested area, how many houses are 1,000 feet from a neighbor? I would guess that 99% of the people in this room have got a neighbor within 1,000 feet of them. So what are we talking about? The ones on the perimeter, or where I live. I have 43 acres. But you know what? 43 acres, I've got somebody on each side of me that also has a 40-acre parcel. So this is just talking about the perimeter of the city. 200 feet would probably cover 98% of the properties in the congested area. Let me just go into how we came about this. And this has kind of got my prepared speech a little disjointed, but this seems to be the issue, so let's just get it out of the way right now. Well, you know, I'm going to go on my testimony because it starts real early. The first thing I want to say is to the hunters that listened to where we were before, welcome to my world. This is something that I've been involved with for 35 years. We've been doing this particular thing for 2 years. The history of this will probably tell you how a lot of this stuff evolved, and probably most of you know it, but I'm just going to be real brief about it. In 2007, there was a couple dogs caught near some real heavily traveled trails in South Reno. The trail safe started with it, and then I started working with Carol Tresner. We got together, we entered into it with a spirit of cooperation. Let's fix a problem. We did it. We came to this commission, and we set up a thing, and everybody was happy. About 3 years later, this feral cat got caught down on the river. Had nothing to do with residences. I mean, it had to do close to a county park. It was already illegal because it was within the 200-foot limit of the roads. So we got together again. I got together in the spirit of cooperation. Let's solve a specific problem and do the same thing we did before. You know, we've talked a lot about slippery slopes, guys, and here we go. We came to an agreement through a moderated meeting with Tom Wilson, who used to be on the Washoe County Advisory Board, and we came to an agreement of 1,000 feet within the firearms congested area of Washoe County. We brought that to the commission, and it was denied because of a last minute, you know, some problems with government trappers and the pest control guys. They figured they hadn't been invited to the meetings, although we'd been doing it for 8 months. Anyway, we got past that. TrailSafe then went to the Nevada State Legislature and added on Clark County registration, et cetera, et cetera. Well, at that point, we kind of felt like, okay, we entered into this in a good faith effort to solve a problem, and bam, all of a sudden it expanded. You know, I didn't really appreciate that too much. I thought that we had operated on a course that was probably going to work, and away we went. It was then, I need to go back on the 1,000-yard, 1,000 feet thing. Before we came to the commission, Trish asked me if 1,000 yards would work. I went to my board, you know, we talked about it. How much does it affect? We said, yeah, okay, if it'll keep us out of the legislature, wonderful. So they went to the legislature. We went through that whole process. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but we heard this in the Senate Natural Resource Committee twice, the Assembly Natural Resource Committee once. Trap registration was rejected out of hand, and we were sent back to the Wildlife Commission. So we went back to our board since we came back here, and my guy said, well, you know what? We were pretty agreeable about that 1,000-yard thing. And it really doesn't mean that much anyway, so if they're going to keep adding on, why don't we go back to 1,000 feet to make the point that there are two sides to this equation? And if we're going to add on, then we reserve the right to start subtracting. Really, there's no big deal about the distances. This is to make the point that it can work both ways. And that is the reason for our 1,000 feet versus the 1,000 yards. Like I say, these numbers aren't going to match.
15 seconds.
Okay. You know, that's probably enough. Hell, we've talked about this for 2 years. I think everybody's heard it, haven't they? So, any questions or?
Any question for Joel? Okay, thanks, Joel.
Thank you,
Gina
guys.
Greasom.
I'd like to get a clarification real quick. I'm also speaking on behalf of the Las Vegas Valley Humane Society, and I have letters from the Mount Charleston Cab and the Mountain Springs. May I be allotted additional time to read their letters into the record? Since I'm speaking on their behalf, thank you. And I'll go ahead and just start with that. For the record, Gina Greisen, Nevada Voters for Animals, and speaking on behalf of the Las Vegas Valley Humane Society today. Nevada Wildlife Commission, dated March 22nd, this is from the Las Vegas Valley Humane Society, reference proposed trapping regulations. Dear Commissioners, representatives of the Las Vegas Valley Humane Society have attended all of the Southern Nevada meetings held by the Commission on this issue, have attended the last two Clark County Committee to Manage Wildlife hearings where the issue is dominated by the trappers on the local committee. The meeting on Tuesday, March 20th, was an embarrassing display for the local commission and one which will not play well in front of the legislature or the Clark County Commission. What we do know is that a very small number of trappers, probably less than 40, based on the trapping reports and not the 200 cited by the representative of the Nevada Trappers Association, who also sits on the committee, are trying very hard to place their right to trap with very little accountability over the rights of 2 million plus people in Clark County. These local committees do not represent the county's population. At the January 31st meeting, a large number of no trapping people showed up. At the last meeting, the trapping community showed up in force, 40 people, including children, for a too small meeting room and a meeting which was poorly run. Such a committee meeting is a waste of our time. The current proposal does not even consider some of the major issues for Southern Nevada, including the issue of Mount Charleston and the surrounding federal lands, areas, or that 1 mile is the standard on these federal lands. I'm personally offended by the continual issue of blaming the victims because of the issue of dogs being out of range of their owners' voices. This is a red herring. If you follow your CAB's recommendations, you can be assured that those of us from Southern Nevada will be back at the legislature questioning the actions of this commission. I would hope that this commission is more politically astute than the trapping community. Gina Greisen will be represented the Las Vegas Valley Humane Society at the Reno Commission meeting. Cordially, Karen S. Lane, President. Mount Charleston Town Advisory Board, March 1, 2012. To the Nevada Department of Wildlife Trapping Regulation Committee. Dear committee members, this letter states the position of the Mount Charleston Town Advisory Board, a recommending body of Clark County, Nevada government. The TAB supports SB 226 and joins with other communities within the Spring Mountains National Recreation Area in advocating for greater protections for the general public. The TAB wants the Wildlife Commission to take the directive from the Nevada legislature as a mandate to balance the rights of the trapper with those of the general public who wish to enjoy their public lands without fear of they, their children, or their pets becoming the victims of traps. The following are the issues most important to the TAB for the Spring Mountains National Recreation Area, we consider that these are public and safety issues. 1, traps must be placed further from homes and trails, not just maintained roads. Traps should be a minimum of 1 mile from all residential, state, county, federal, and commercial buildings and roadways. Also 1 mile from all U.S. Forest Service designated roads, campgrounds and facilities, and recreation trails. Residents, tourists, horse riders, hikers, bikers, skiers, and dog walkers should all be able to enjoy and explore the great outdoors and the area around their homes without fear of being caught in a trap. The BLM regulations specify 1 mile boundary for traps from all trails, so this figure would produce uniformity on federal land. 2, traps must be identified to provide citizens and law enforcement some means to identify trap owners. The very idea that the traps are not identified is both puzzling and disturbing and appears to protect only the irresponsible trapper. 3, traps must be inspected by the trapper more often, every 24 hours, than currently required every 96 hours. Even NDOW lists among common violations that traps are not visited at least every 96 hours. 4, signs shall be posted prominently during the trapping season to warn citizens about this danger. Thank you for your attention to these matters. Pat Fitzsimmons, Chair, Mount Charleston Town Advisory Board. And I have the one also from the Mountain Springs, but it's very similar in nature, and I'm sure you've already received it. So now to go to my testimony. First of all, I'm a little bit confused now. Are we talking about the congested firearm map, the no shooting area when you guys, okay. Except for the fact, and this is the issue that I know that you're going to address, but I guess I feel like if you're going to make a recommendation or you're going to put something in place, if you have the support from the other side, I don't think the legislature is going to mind if you go further. And if you don't finish, I don't think the legislature is going to mind that you worked with the other side and we came to some agreements on these issues. That's what amendments are for. First of all, I have to say that on the, you guys already talked about the language. I'm sure you'll work that out about populations of 100,000 or more. I liked Scott Rain's idea of, using the census data. Also on C, 1C, a person trapping on private property, I believe you need to add with written permission from the property owner, because if it's private property, anyone can trap there, and if it's a large property with acres and acres, maybe the property owner wouldn't even know you're trapping there, but it's private property. And the reason for the 1 mile, and I'm sure that I've repeated this many times, in the federal supplemental regulations that govern the Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area. Now, someone said earlier, a lot of the land in Nevada is federal land. We are surrounded by a lot of federal land. A lot of the issues are occurring on these federal lands. In the Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area, there's a whole area you're not even allowed to trap. And I'll address some of the illegal trapping that's been going on in public comment. But trapping is allowed in accordance with state law, except within areas close to trapping. Trapping in violation of state law is prohibited. The following areas are closed to trapping, and it's north of 160, east of the Spring Mountain Range, and below 5,000 feet. And then it says all areas within 1 mile of any designated hiking trail. This is where the Mount Charleston and the Mountain Springs boards took that language and wanted some uniformity. And I have the map here that shows the no shooting range. So here's all the Red Rock Canyon NCA. I know that there's disputes about whether it's all covered, but it is. And then here's the Mount Charleston, the Tioga National Forest. The land is right there. I mean, you just drive past a sign and then you're on the other land. So I think that uniformity really would be good when it comes down to enforcement, because that's a whole nother issue, is enforcement. So I would encourage and urge the 1 mile. And just to frame this issue on the 1 mile, because we've gone from, 50 feet to a mile. I was angry after the last meeting where someone said, we shouldn't even have any regulations. So I posted a petition, Stop Fur Trapping in the Las Vegas Valley, and there's already over 6,200 signatures on it. Not all of them are from Clark County, but these are federal lands. So they're owned by the United States citizens, which is why I have the information on the Park Service that says, since 1916, the American people have entrusted the National Park Service with the care of their national parks. So I'll add that in too. And we also have, and sorry, there's pages missing, over probably 100 signatures just from Clark County residents that were looking to ban fur trapping. So, and I mean, this was just one day that we got over 400 signatures. Now, only 2 people said no to me that day at the Pet Expo, and that was because they were taxidermists. So, I would urge, as with the bear hunt, and I will echo the comments by the chairman. This is going to go back to the legislature if we can't come, to some consensus. The issue is getting bigger because people didn't know it was happening. And as information is shared and people find out, they're very disturbed. Obviously, I'll have some public comment about why people are finding out more about this, but I also want to remind, too, the commission and Chairman Macbeth, I believe that you probably better than anyone know this. I believe if you work for one of the big hotels, the hotels have gone pet friendly. A lot of people come to Las Vegas. I mean, they just had a big ordinance and they sent it to that special committee down on the Strip because they wanted to have input on this ordinance about people using their animals to solicit funds down there, because they didn't want it to impact the guests that were staying there and bringing their pets. Caesars Entertainment added some pet-friendly rooms, and it was so phenomenally successful, they immediately expanded it within like 6 months. Many of the hotels are pet-friendly down there now. We're a progressive nation. People love their pets. They're no longer just the guard dog in the backyard. They're part of the family. So, and this is a lot of why we're even discussing this. So thank you.
Gil Yannick.
He's stiff. Give him a second.
Thank you. For the record, Gil Yannick, Carson Advisory Board. Our board, going through the draft trapping regulation, suggested the following changes. In Section 2, the distance being changed from half mile to 1,000 feet. Section 1, the last sentence, removing the word mice and replacing that with unprotected species, removing the word mouse before the word trap. In Section 2, removing mouse in 2C and replacing mouse with the letter A and say a trap means a device. And then in the second line of that sentence, remove and replace the word mice with unprotected species. Thank you.
Paul Dixon.
For the record, Paul Dixon representing Clark County Advisory Board. As you guys noticed, we had a split vote on the distance. Back to originally what Commissioner McNinch said, I kind of took to heart what Maggie Carlton from Natural Resources said. She said, and I call it the Goldilocks rule, don't make it too small, don't make it too big. Make it just right so that it's there. And if the legislature told us that they wanted us to do something with distance, 200 feet was clearly too small. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent us back to talk about it. And at my CAB meeting, I had a lot of people from the Trapping Association who were trapper friendly and were sportsmen who had beliefs. And there was a lot of discussion of change or no change. And we had testimony about how we only have 1,000 feet for sexual predators to be near our schools. Why would we be putting more protection around trails and for animals than we do for our children in our school districts? So our board went on a vote of 500 feet. I disagreed with that, and I was a dissenting vote, just so you know, because I believe that 500 feet doesn't meet the intent of what Ms. Carlton came and talked to my board about, but that's where we stand on that. Thank you.
Ken Wellington. Warm up. Pamela Garten. Larry Johnson.
Larry Johnson, Coalition for Nevada's Wildlife. Support the regs with the exception of we support Nevada Trapper Association with 1,000-foot setback. Biggest issue in this for me personally, of course, is a private property exemption, which again, it is the right of property owners to protect their livestock, and that trapping is absolutely mandatory for us. Yeah, thank you.
Mel Belding.
Mel Belding, Washoe County. I support the regulation. Went to all the meetings in Reno. I'd like to commend Miss Taylor. Private property was an issue with her at these meetings, and today it was not an issue on private property. At least if it was, she didn't mention it. I agree with 1,000 feet. I think if you were to poll people in here, I know I've heard Mr. Johnson say his dog was caught twice. Larry's dog was caught twice, and the reason why I think 1,000 feet is reasonable, I'd bet you that almost every dog that's caught, and I don't think there's that many of them, but they're caught many miles from a residence, and it's usually when someone is hunting. I don't know if you can put a protection that's large enough on a dog or any other unintended victim, quote unquote, that gets caught in a trap. So I think 1,000 feet is reasonable. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm out of cards.
Okay, any other public comment with regard to the trapping regulation? Okay, I'll bring it back to the commission. Go ahead. Scott, you're next.
I'll start out on the distance thing. I've talked to a lot of trappers, and I don't know a single trapper that wants to be in 1,000 feet of somebody's house because they do not want to have the potential of trapping somebody's pet. I also look at all of us sitting up here and we're hunters, and we know what a coyote looks like at 330 yards or 1,000 feet and have a pretty good visual of that. And I just don't want some lady standing in her kitchen seeing something trapped out her kitchen window that far. I mean, we all can visualize that, and I don't want to do that, and I don't think that's where any of us want to go. I definitely think the 880 yards or 1/2 mile is more than reasonable.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to have us vote on all aspects of this regulation except the distance first. I'd like to, have that, propose that for motion, and then then maybe come back and hammer out the distance. I think that might be reasonable.
Well, let's see where we...
Just because there's some complicating factors in the rest of us, and I would like to actually, try to get the rest of that verbiage down, and then we can come back to and quite frankly, somebody, if we vote for 500 feet, I could live with that. 1,000 feet, I could live with that. If that, having failed 1,000 feet, I could maybe live with a 1/4 mile, 1,320 feet. That would probably be, hey, I'm pretty obvious. That would probably be about the extent of it.
Pretty good mathematician.
So,
Okay,
20 calculators later.
Mr.
So,
Chairman,
there you go.
if I could, we did get this as a committee. We did vote on them individually for that very reason, just to, so,
Okay.
so just so you know that it was fairly painless, and it did allow us to get some of the things off the table and kind of clear the waters down to the real issue. So I don't have a problem with doing it that way.
Okay.
Myself.
Do you have any comments?
That was it. I think the distances are reasonable, and as long as you're, the 1/2 miles, I don't think that's reasonable. It's been explained ad nauseum. Thank you.
So you are okay with
anything under any of those distances, but
Under
not the 1/2 mile. The 1/2 mile is excessive.
Oh, you think 1/2 miles? Okay.
That is excessive. The other distances less than that we've referred to are
okay.
Reasonable.
Yeah. Mr. Schrum.
Mr. Chairman, let's put this into perspective. 1,000 feet is no lower than 3 football fields. That's quite a distance. I think that's more than adequate. And then it's reasonable.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. McNinch.
Thank you. There has been obviously a ton of discussion on the 1,000 yards, 1,000 feet is really what it was, and I think we ended up with a 1/2 mile. With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, because it was a little easier for people to relate to. But I did jot down a couple of reasons why I think that that 1/2 mile would be reasonable. First of all, we've talked about residences versus trails. Trails are places where people choose to go. They're transitory, people coming and going. Residences aren't. So I think that there is a difference between 1,000 feet and 1,000 yards, whatever the difference is. And I do think that there's that it warrants a little bit further distance and a little more consideration for residents. I mean, these folks it's where they live. And although they choose to live there, in some respects they don't have, the ability to manage that. They can choose what trails they go on, but they can't necessarily. Anyway, I think that there's a consideration there. I think that within that half-mile zone, if there's any problems, the critter control companies can operate within that half-mile zone. They have permits that, so I think that there's opportunities to deal with rogue wildlife in those areas. As far as the trappers, I think that the impact is a little less